Hello, I'm Bishop Keith, and it's wonderful to have you continuing this journey with me as we reflect on the message of Easter. Thank you so much for your encouragement and for your support. It's wonderful to have. Today is the third Sunday after Easter, and we're reflecting on the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verses 11 to 18. The main theme of chapter 10 is that Jesus is the Good Shepherd. This is why some churches call it Good Shepherd Sunday. It's especially pertinent after the terrible events in Sydney at the Assyrian Orthodox Church, where Bishop Emmanuel was violently attacked, along with one of his priests, because of course the church was the Church of the Good Shepherd. The church is the Church of the Good Shepherd. And our prayers go out to Bishop Emmanuel and his priest and the congregation. Being a bishop is very hard work these days and very tough these days. Many commentators believe that this Good Shepherd discourse is a parable on what has occurred in chapter 9. In this chapter, Jesus is travelling and he comes across a blind man. He spits on the ground to make some mud, puts it on the eyes of the blind man and tells him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. The man does this and he receives his eyesight again. It's a great miracle and there's much rejoicing. However, there is a dispute between his neighbours and over the miracle and about his identity, and so they take him to the Pharisees, who question him. When they find out what Jesus did, they proclaim that Jesus is not from God because he did manual work on the Sabbath, as well as the healing. Now, when the man goes and confesses Jesus to be the Messiah, they put him out of the synagogue. When Jesus hears about this, he pastorally cares for the man, and at the same time judges the Pharisees. So here are some questions that arise from Jesus' speaking about being the Good Shepherd in the light of chapter 9. Who are faithful shepherds? Well, only those who are centered on Jesus. Jesus is the one true shepherd who saves by standing in the place of others. Who are the true sheep? The ones who put their trust in Jesus alone. And who is the true Son? Well, Jesus, the one that God the Father sent. Jesus starts off by saying, truly, truly, or Amen, Amen. When we read this, Jesus is referring to what came before. And what came before was the healing of the blind man and all that occurred in chapter 9. So, Jesus speaking about being the Good Shepherd is a parable on who Jesus is and why he matters. Jesus is speaking to a community that was very familiar with shepherds. They lived with the flock, protected it, and led it to pasture and water. They put the flock in a place of safety at night and slept in the only easy access to the sheepfold. This meant that no one could go in or out except through the shepherd. In the parable, Jesus speaks about people coming into the sheepfold by another way. That is, not through the shepherd. Such a person, according to Jesus, is a thief or a rip-off artist. For Jesus' day, and in the light of what transpired in chapter 9, this seems to represent people who say that you can get to God through other ways, other than Jesus. Obedience to the temple, for example, and Torah are the only ways. They leave people in their less than fully human existence and are seemingly okay with that. Today, it might be prosperity gospel messages, where if you give generously to God, you will be rewarded by God. It might be by saying that only through speaking in tongues are you a true Christian. Or, unless you live your life in a way that is acceptable to us, which we dress up as being the only acceptable behaviour that God allows, you cannot be part of our community of faith. The one coming through the gateway is a true shepherd of the sheep. This is because the person who does this is going through Jesus, who is the Good Shepherd and the gate. Thus, only those who proclaim Jesus and model their lives on Jesus are true shepherds of Jesus, the flock. The blind man fulfills this role, doesn't he? When he proclaims Jesus even when he is expelled from the synagogue and the temple. Proclaiming Jesus is risky business. It often gets you into trouble. Only those who proclaim Jesus, even to their own detriment, are true pastors, true shepherds. The familiar voice that Jesus refers to is interesting. Again, the blind man is the example. Before he could see Jesus, he could only hear him. He heard what Jesus commanded and he obeyed. We ourselves do not see Jesus, so we are very much like the blind man, aren't we? We need to be attuned to the voice of Jesus and those who are the true pastors and shepherds of Jesus. Anyone else will lead us astray. As I reflect on our churches today, I see this reality. Our churches are emptying because we have shepherds who are not going through the gateway, which is Jesus, and are therefore not exemplifying him and proclaiming him. When we get to our passage, we get again the truly, truly. Here, Jesus reiterates himself being the good shepherd. And this time he says that he will lay down his life for the sheep. In contrast, the hired hand doesn't stick around when the going gets tough. They get going and fast. This is the one who abandons the sheep and leaves them to their own devices. Sheep are helpless, and this is a terrible thing to do. This description sounds a bit like a bad pastor rather than a false Messiah. It sounds like one who has not gone through the gateway like the good pastor did in the earlier part of the parable. They have come in by another way. Jesus, as the good shepherd, lays down his life for the sheep. But that will not be the end, because Jesus has the ability to take up his life again. So, what might all this mean for us? As I look at the church, I see parishes struggling, pastors overwhelmed, and confusion and despair in the church. Much of it seems to me because we have lost our Christ-centeredness as the people of God. We have become too obsessed with certain behaviours, which often stem from misunderstood biblical passages. We want people to change and transform, which is great. But we ask them to change and transform in ways that we have deemed to be appropriate and often give biblical reasons for it. It seems we have forgotten that our task is to introduce people to Jesus and allow him to transform people rather than us. In this, I think of the woman caught in the act of adultery. If Jesus or the Pharisees who brought her had obeyed the law, she would have died. But her encounter with Jesus allowed transformation. When Jesus met Zacchaeus, he is an outcast because he's a tax collector. But when he encounters Jesus and meets with him, he is changed and transformed. The woman who anoints the feet of Jesus is changed and transformed by her encounter with Jesus, despite the derision and scorn of the host and those in the banquet. The young man who is crippled and lowered through the roof encounters Jesus and is transformed and renewed, no longer ostracized. His sins are forgiven, but he's also healed and changed and transformed. The lepers who meet Jesus are cleansed, and the one who returns is renewed and strengthened. The woman with the issue of blood encounters Jesus and is changed and transformed and renewed and restored to the community that she was an outcast from when she talks and speaks with Jesus. Whether you are one ordained by the church or like the blind man, an ordinary parishioner, if we are to be a true pastor, a true shepherd, a true member of the flock of Jesus, then we have to be like Jesus. The Jesus I see in the Gospels is full of kindness, empathy, love, compassion. The Jesus in the Gospels welcomes those ostracized by the world, either secular or religious. Due to our brokenness, like everyone else, we cannot change or transform anyone. Only Jesus can. It's a bit like where one beggar looking for bread, taking the hands of another beggar and saying, I know where we can find this bread, and we lead them to Jesus. If our churches are to be truly Jesus-like, then we will welcome everyone, even those whom we feel uncomfortable in the presence of. We will introduce them to Jesus and help them be changed and transformed by that encounter with the risen Jesus. And in doing this, we too may also be further changed and transformed, and the church just might start to grow again. And wouldn't that be fantastic? The Lord be with you.